Happy Black Friday and happy Thanksgiving. I'm hoping that you are able to spend some time with your family eating Thanksgiving leftovers and watching movies. But don't just watch them idly, analyze them. Let's analyze a couple movies right here. Put them under the microscope. So today we're going to be looking at the Ghostbusters franchise and the Top Gun franchise. And the reason that we're doing this, I think, will become obvious in a second, but there's been a lot of conversation about Top Gun Maverick recently, the very recent Top Gun, not so much remake, kind of sequel, but that is something that people have been commenting a lot. There was a guy on Twitter, his name is Paul Anleitner, he's a cultural analyst, and he said that the fact that Top Gun Maverick succeeded in the box office meant that Trump was going to win the election. Now, this would have been a much better prediction to make a couple weeks before the election than a few days after, but I agree with him. And there's somebody that actually sort of kind of predicted this 20 years ago. This is a story that I've never told on camera, but it will reveal some very interesting things about filmmaking in general, politics a little bit less specifically, but it's a fantastic cultural oversight. About 20 years ago in Los Angeles, there was an event called Script Expo 3. This was either 2004 or 2005, and I was there. I was listening to lectures by Hollywood screenwriters, and one of them was Jack Epps Jr., who is the guy who wrote the original Top Gun. And the point that he was making in his lecture, at the beginning of the lecture, is your story. When you make a film, a big blockbuster Hollywood movie, your story must have some sort of Judeo-Christian foundation. It must have a Christian arc, or middle America won't buy it. The arc of the story needs to line up with our traditional values, which come from Christianity. And as soon as he said this, there were boos from the crowd. And the reason for that is, even 20 years ago, Hollywood was full of progressive postmodern types, and at this Script Expo, I would say mostly like punk film school grads, and they were booing an actual successful filmmaker who had written an extremely successful film. Like, just for reference, the original Top Gun came out in 1986, and it had a box office success of about $375 million, which is basically $1 billion in today's dollars. And it had a massive cultural impact. It completely changed Navy recruiting, and it had one of the most successful soundtracks of all time. So Jack Epps Jr. is an undeniable Hollywood success. And then right after that, he had a big career. The next 5 years of his life were writing a movie almost every year for a big Hollywood star. So he had a Robert Redford movie, and he had a Michael J. Fox movie, and he had a Tom Hanks movie, and then he did a Warren Beatty movie, who was actually, believe it or not, a big Hollywood star at the time. So this audience is booing this guy who has had this amazing career. And he said, hey, listen, you can boo me if you want, but this Christian paradigm is the one that your audience is living in. And if you want your movie to resonate with them, it's got to reflect the reality that they exist in. And he gave an example. That Warren Beatty movie was Dick Tracy, which is not a great film. And it lost a fair amount of money. And I will explain why, or I'll explain what Jack Epps explained. Your classic film noir detective movie, which Dick Tracy is supposed to be, is going to have a bunch of particular stereotypes and tropes in it. Your virtuous detective is going to have to make the right choices no matter how world-weary and beaten down and bourbon-soaked he actually is. And then there's going to be a virtuous female who needs rescuing, and there's going to be a femme fatale who represents some kind of temptation. And he cast in this role as the femme fatale, Madonna.
What's your day off?
Sunday.
It's a big world. Must be Sunday somewhere.
Which was, you know, it's a little bit on the nose, but it worked out pretty well. The problem is that Warren Beatty and Madonna became romantically or carnally involved, and Madonna needed more and more screen time all the time, and Warren Beatty was coming to Jack Epps Jr. to rewrite the script all the time to give her a bigger and a bigger part. And so this femme fatale character, who is supposed to be one of the antagonists, one of the temptations, one of the obstacles for the hero, basically became the romantic interest for the film. This is out of balance. This is not what people expect. This is not actually something that they want to see happen in the movie. Now, technically, because she dies at the end of the movie, Dick Tracy can end up with the fine, upstanding widow, but for the entire movie, he is going the other way. Audiences didn't love it.
I wanted a guy to take a little charge. He's insecure. He seems to be more contemporary. It seems to be more about Warren Beatty than it is about the guy in the
but
comic
that's
strip.
legitimate. I mean, I think maybe
it's legitimate.
that's why Warren Beatty wanted to make this movie.
I just don't
maybe
think it's that interesting.
It cost Disney about $57 million. And interestingly, it was kind of the end of Jack Epps' career for reasons that he didn't go into. I think it had more to do with Warren Beatty being fed up with him than one box office flop. But the question is, was he right? Now, let's look at Top Gun for a minute. Now, you might be asking yourself, is Top Gun a Christian movie? I mean, it's not the sort of thing that you see in Pure Flix. It's not the sort of thing that you even see on Hallmark channels, but it's got the framework that is there. It values humility and it values selflessness, service, both to country and to your wingmen. And there's a relationship with the father that is a really important part of Tom Cruise's motivation in this movie, which, by the way, is something that's in most of his movies. There's sacrifice and there's this need to mature as a person so that he can better serve his fellow naval aviators. So very much jiving with, very much within balance, very much part of this Christian framework of reality that Jack Epps Jr. was talking about. And Top Gun Maverick is the same way. It's not theologically deep. The story is actually super basic, almost, I would say, cartoonishly flat. Is that a good way to put it? I mean, it's basically a Star Wars trench run. You go through this canyon, you go up into this thing, then you have to bullseye a target that's roughly womp rat sized, and then you get out of there with an opportunity for being captured by the enemy base and escaping in a stolen spaceship. I mean, F-14. It's not Citizen Kane or anything, but it has the exact same themes as the original. Honoring parents is front and center. Bravery, striving for excellence. Things that are, well, today, these are hardcore conservative values. Far right, even, is how they have been described. The fact that there's even a meritocracy at all in the film is something that certain film critics were deeply uncomfortable with. But audiences obviously liked the film, and it was consistent with the first movie made all the way back in 1986. Audiences wanted to see that character, played by Tom Cruise, succeed, and they wanted to see his continuing life story and what he was up to. And they wanted to see him teach young pilots to mature in the same way that he did, and they wanted some more of that father-son stuff. And the movie delivered, and the audiences showed up for it, and it made a ton of money. Now, let's compare it to Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters was made in 1984. I would say also not an overtly Christian movie. This is not, how ghosts work theologically speaking, but there are a bunch of deeply conservative things inside that people assume to be Christian. The main characters are starting a small business, and their main obstacles are government regulations. Everybody in the movie has an arc, there's some interesting lessons, all sorts of conservative talking points are in there, like mocking academia, and the bad guys are very specific EPA bureaucrats.
I'm warning you, turning off these machines would be extremely hazardous.
I'll tell you what's hazardous. You're facing federal prosecution for at least a half a dozen environmental violations. Now, either you shut off these beams or we shut them off for you.
At the very least, they are super patriotic. And even people on the internet have pointed out they are basically conservative archetypes.
They swagger around town in full combat gear with deadly weapons slung over their shoulders. They're OG open carry activists.
Also, Ghostbusters is a fantastic comedy, but it's not the underlying story that really made it successful. They kind of captured lightning in a bottle, as you can see by comparing it to the second film that was made a few years later. They had this perfect character chemistry, and they had a lot of fun stuff. And so it was very successful, made $296 million, which in today's money is over $830 million. And so, yeah, it is something that is worth reviving decades later. It had a cartoon show, successful soundtrack, excellent franchise material. But in 2016, when Sony revisited this concept, they didn't really carry over any of the things that had made the film successful. We have brand new characters and no continuation of the story.
Very good, Louis. Short but pointless.
Scientists catching ghosts is kind of a fun idea in the 1980s, but Today, your average Marvel movie has gods and wizards fighting aliens with time-traveling nanotech, so like this science and ghost thing is not a fun juxtaposition anymore. I would call this movie more of a studio-sanctioned ripoff than a continuation, a remake, or even a reboot. And I'm not the only one who thinks so. When the trailer dropped, it became the most disliked video on YouTube in internet history. And the reaction from the studio was kind of interesting because the cast and the crew began to belittle the fans in the press. And they actually reshot parts of the movie to mock not just the fans, but kind of the franchise in general.
Since we are all in the business of ruining men's childhoods.
Thank you.
Now, almost the same thing happened with the Top Gun Maverick trailer. When it dropped, fans had some criticism. Specifically, the jacket that Tom Cruise wears used to have in the original film a Taiwan flag and a Japanese flag, and those had been changed to be kind of generic shape flags because of the Chinese market, which is a huge, huge international box office thing that every studio is chasing. When fans pointed out, though, that the jacket had been changed, either before it had been shot or through CGI later, the studio did the exact opposite thing. They actually converted it back, either with CGI or going to the original footage, to the actual Taiwanese flag, in direct contravention of what China wanted. It was banned in China, and even though they lost that entire international market, they still made $1.5 billion by listening to the fans. The other big difference is the way that they brought back the original actors. So obviously Tom Cruise doesn't age, he just stays the same all the time. But they brought back Val Kilmer, who was in pretty rough shape. And they brought him back to honor him. So they made his character an admiral. They didn't do any weird AI stuff. They didn't do any deep fake nonsense. It was a very honest portrayal of who he was at the time.
The Navy needs Maverick. The kid needs Maverick. That's why I fought for you. That's why you're still here.
Ghostbusters did the exact opposite. They brought back the original cast as cameos to mock them. Not only did the new cast literally attack the logo from the first movie, but they actually brought in Bill Murray specifically to make fun of him.
Aaron, come on, we have finally succeeded at doing the thing that we have talked about since we were little kids. And you want to risk it all, what, for him? Who cares if you impress him?
Oh, God, you two are something.
And then they kill him on screen.
Casper?
He wasn't really Ghostbusters material.
There's actually no love at all for the original Ghostbusters material, just a desire to cash in on the old IP and to dunk on the fans of the original IP.
I think by having a lot of the people that were in the original first two movies have cameos in our movie makes it feel like they approve.
Yeah.
Now you might be asking yourself, is there more going on than sheer greed and laziness? Like the reshoots of the movie to specifically attack people who disliked the trailer isn't something that you do just because you're out of ideas. This is something that you do because you have an actual animosity towards the fans of some sort. And this film, Ghostbusters 2016, launched an entire anti-woke YouTube industrial complex.
But was it really as bad as they say, or have we misjudged Ghostbusters 2016?
There have been a million critiques of this movie, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on the specific things. Whole channels exist to point out woke nonsense in this and other studio films. But yes, film deconstruction is very fun, but modern films that reimagine older IP are kind of destructive by nature, and the best way to see this is probably to compare them with Top Gun Maverick.
The future is coming, and you're not in it.
So one of the things that was brought up a lot in the Ghostbusters press junkets and hoopla around it was the gender swapping. 4 male Ghostbusters are swapped by 4 female actresses playing Ghostbusters to smash the patriarchy or something. Is this really truly a female empowerment story, or is it just bait? I'd like to point out the original Ghostbusters are goofball scientists. They're not really macho action stars. So yeah.
Sorry, Beckman. I'm terrified beyond the capacity for rational thought.
Turning these characters into women isn't really empowering.
If you wanted to take a macho, manly man movie and flip it, Ghostbusters is not the franchise to do that with.
You take a Roadhouse.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Top Gun.
Top Gun.
It's just sort of equal opportunity dumb. They don't make those characters any more heroic. And then the female character in the original Ghostbusters, played by Annie Potts, is actually pretty awesome. She is the most unflappable one.
Dropping off or picking up?
Dropping off.
Just a moment.
So she's a very tough character, and she gets replaced in this remake, of course, gender swapped, to Chris Hemsworth. And here's what the film is doing. They take this very, very masculine guy who's currently doing superhero movies when this thing is made, and they make him absolutely, completely humiliated receptionist in this film. It is not something that is empowering to women overall. It's just something that is kind of belittling to guys, and guys and gals should be frustrated by this.
Would it be okay if I bring my cat to work sometimes? He has major anxiety problems.
You know what? I would love to let your cat live here with you, but I have a pretty severe cat allergy.
Oh, I don't have a cat. He's a dog. His name's My Cat.
Your dog's name is My Cat?
And Mike Hat.
Your dog's name is Mike, last name Hat.
Well, his full name is Michael Hat.
Now, in the original film, one of the Ghostbusters is played by Ernie Hudson. He's a great actor and he has a great character. He's more than just a token black guy. He's a great straight man for that particular group, and it works phenomenally. In Ghostbusters 2016, we have Leslie Jones. She is a token black character, and she's played in a very frustratingly insulting stereotype for some reason.
You get a car, and you get a car, and you get a car.
You didn't disclose that the vehicle was going to be a hearse.
Now, critics of the woke filmmaking have definitely gone too far in attacking real people, and Leslie Jones is a perfect example of this. People were very critical of her performance because she played the most annoying character in the movie. But I would like to point out that she's the only one who's actually playing a character in the movie. Everybody else is just improvising whatever they feel like at the time.
What I knew I had to do was I had to allow my cast to take control of the film.
Hey, we can ask for the firehouse.
All right, well,
That's a great idea. Should we go cut to it right now?
She's the only one that's sticking to the script. In fact, I would say she's putting in the hardest work in the entire film. And so it is unfair for people to rag on her for playing the part as it was written. But this brings up another really interesting point that we've seen for the last 10 or 15 years of Hollywood filmmaking. Now, studios will virtue signal with their casting by picking minorities, but they're almost always unknown minorities because they're a lot cheaper to hire. Then they will write annoying, offensive, stereotypical characters for them to play. They will roll them out in the trailers, essentially putting them on the front lines of the culture wars and kind of force these actors to scuttle their own careers and then utterly abandon them. So Leslie Jones did a phenomenal job playing a terrible character, and she has not been cast in a Sony project ever since. This phenomenon is probably most visible inside of the Star Wars franchise. These actors that you see on screen right now were given terrible characters. They were used, I would say, offensively to rile up fans, and then written out of later films, abandoned, or even had their movies canceled later on. This is one from the Acolyte show. And you might be wondering, where did the Acolyte showrunner learn to use young women in this way? Possibly from her boss, Harvey Weinstein.
This isn't about good or bad. This is about power and who is allowed to use it.
Now, Ghostbusters 2016 is not the first movie to have some of this nonsense, but it is the most obvious, and it set a bunch of trends. It was pioneering in a new wave of film marketing called outrage marketing. And Sony did this with their most disliked video in YouTube history. They went through and they deleted a bunch of comments, but they didn't delete the offensive comments that attacked Leslie Jones. They didn't delete the offensive comments that were angry about the gender swapping. They deleted as many of the normal comments as they could find. People who were pointing out that the film did not look as fun as the original movie. The cast wasn't as fun to listen to as the original Ghostbusters. The people who had legitimate criticisms or question about the movie got hidden, and all of the people who said terrible things about stereotypes were amplified so that they could make the case that the only people who don't like this movie do it because they hate women. And over time, I would say that YouTube and various other review sites have kind of leaned into this outrage marketing. Today, downvotes are hidden on YouTube unless you go out of your way to enable them, and Ghostbusters is kind of part of this. Rotten Tomatoes movies, you often see very distinct differences between the studio access film reviewers and regular folks like us. And the reason for that is just so that this disparity of opinions can be kind of hidden. I keep using the term offensive, but it's probably not the right word. I should be using adversarial or hostile. This kind of outrage marketing is deliberately hostile toward a specific group of people so that it can bring other allegations against them.
Since we are all in the business of ruining men's childhoods.
Thank you.
This is why certain movies, critics or fans are being told you shouldn't complain about this because this isn't made for you, even though technically you're a fan of the franchise. But it also happens outside of movies and TV shows and games, even in the political realm. This idea that we will trot out certain manufactured minority candidates, and then any criticism of their positions or lack of positions can be chalked up to a specific allegation about some sort of social justice crime. Now, I don't want to get too deep into this or talk too much about woke stuff, because I think that woke is a term that needs to be on its way out. It's vague and it's not clear. So we'll go back to Top Gun. If Top Gun success equals Trump victory, is Top Gun anti-woke? I mean, if you watch the trailer and if you watch the movie, you will see a bunch of guys. They have guns, weapons, there's war, fast vehicles, powerful machines, and again, that meritocracy that the wokesters hate. Is that why the movie succeeded? Because there's just such a toxic fandom out there that this is the only thing that they can identify with? Or is Jack Epps right? Is it that people just like good storytelling, even when it's a cartoonishly simple story? Do they want to see people that they like and stories that they resonate with? And not just the toxic fans, but human beings who live in America and like watching movies in general. So are the people 20 years ago who booed Jack Epps Jr. wrong?
Well, why are you booing me? I'm right.
Yes, I think that they are wrong. And not only that, but I want you to remember that 20 years ago, those film school grads are the kind of people that were trying to get into film and television, and a bunch of them, statistically speaking, succeeded. A lot of those folks who booed him are the people that have been making the things that you've been watching for the last decade or so. Script Expo 3 had about 4,000 attendees, so it wouldn't surprise me if a bunch of them worked on various franchise-busting films. They got into the industry and they made the movies which have spent the last 10 or 15 years been failing.
How can two writers who even have the smallest understanding of comedy not get why Ghostbusters worked so well in the first place? Have these people ever seen movies?
Now, it's interesting to me, back then in 2005 or so, people weren't pushing super woke agendas. A lot of the things that you see in today's movies were not buzzwords back then. But these are the circles that I moved in. These are the people that I knew. They wanted to do non-Christian, out of balance, completely different styles of movie making because they claim to hate formulaic storytelling. Their reason for going against Jack Epps' advice, making imbalanced films that follow a Judeo-Christian value system and appeal directly to fans who want to be entertained, that is what they were pushing back directly against. And the pro-diversity crowd slots directly into some of these exact same desires.
Other movies might have followed a similar pattern with equally disastrous results, but Ghostbusters was the one that failed first and failed biggest.
The silly thing is that the movies that this crowd has made are not super diverse. They pretty much have the same talking points, they have pretty much the same ideas, they even end up with basically the same marketing. And if you look at all of the movies, of which Top Gun Maverick is kind of an exception, there is a deconstruction of the old IP. The old heroes of the past need to be replaced or deconstructed. There's been a lot of historical revisionism recently of real people, and Hollywood has now moved on to our fictional heroes.
Let the past die. Kill it if you have to.
I'm not trying to dunk on Ghostbusters 2016 because it is especially particularly bad, but because it is emblematic of a trend. It's fun to compare the original Ghostbusters and Top Gun back in the mid-80s and see how their respective sequels or reboots have done. All of these franchises that are being reimagined from the 80s or the 90s for modern audiences are failing pretty miserably, with a couple of exceptions, like Top Gun Maverick. Some of the people who were in the crowd at Script Expo 3 booing Jack Epps Jr. have since then shipwrecked their careers on the bedrock of his point. Billions and billions of dollars at this point have been spent on studio movies that deconstruct the past and mock our heroes and erode values, pretty much all to financial ruin. They're also all pretty bad art. They're cheap and they're ugly and they're uncreative. I'd like to point out another big difference between Ghostbusters 2016 and Top Gun Maverick are just the physical filmmaking challenges behind each of them.
This is not just green screen nonsense. We're not on some stage. We're out there in the real world capturing all this footage.
This water training we had to do, it was real.
I felt like I was drowning. It was tough.
During flight training, they would be embarrassed about puking.
I have to hold on.
Actors also had to learn how to run the cameras because when they're up in the jet, they have to direct themselves essentially.
Okay, I'm rolling.
I had to really teach them cinematography and the lighting so that they understood what's gonna look good on camera.
Sun angle's great.
Everybody thought it would be impossible for actors to really be in the jets. But that's the gift that Tom gave us, that by the time we got up there, we could handle it.
You can also see the differences between planning and writing and refining ideas and then just throwing a few people on a set to do a bunch of terrible improv.
Paul Feig is a big fan of improv, which is fine in small doses, I guess, but it all depends on your actors being able to come up with great jokes on the fly and the director being able to keep them on track. And based on what I've seen here, they're not, and he didn't.
I have a theory that problem solving forces creativity, kind of like an airplane. If you picture an airplane, an F-18 or an F-14 or something from Top Gun, you understand that you need power to steer or to have lift for the airplane. You need to be exerting energy in order to have control over where you want to go. In the 1980s, Jack Epps Jr., Ivan Reitman, Tony Scott, these guys changed cinema for decades. One of the most fascinating things about Top Gun is even though it's made right in the middle of the 1980s, it sets the tone and visual style for a lot of 90s movies. Millions of dollars have been spent imitating these things in the past. The cultural impact of these films is almost immeasurable because of the creative energy that was put into these projects. Some of it only to solve technical challenges.
Shot Over Camera Systems had just come out with the Shot Over F1 gimbal, and it was the latest and greatest 6-axis gimbal, and I knew I needed to put that gimbal on a jet. About a year and a half later, we were in full testing with what we know now today is the L-39 Cinejet with the Shot Over F1 Rush on the front of it. And that platform absolutely helped us obtain groundbreaking aerials on this movie.
In the screenwriting world, there is a saying, story is king. And people who say that usually mean that the story needs to be complicated and non-formulaic and especially high concept. But what it actually means is, I think, what Jack Epps Jr. meant. It needs to jive with the actual reality. It needs to meet the entertainment desires of the audience. It needs to give them something uplifting and heroic to actually look at. And, well, the market has spoken. We have $1.5 billion in box office success for Top Gun Maverick and roughly $229 million for Ghostbusters. It ended up losing them a huge amount of money.
Ruining men's childhoods.
Thank you. The fact that audiences want to see these kinds of movies, no matter how cartoonishly simple they actually are, should be really encouraging to us. It doesn't just predict a Donald Trump electoral college and popular vote win. It also indicates that people are kind of tired of the old regurgitation and deconstruction of culture and civilization. They would like something that inspires them to build and to strive for greater things.
The end is inevitable, Maverick. Your kind is headed for extinction.
Maybe so, sir. But not today.
So, as you guys are watching movies this weekend with your families, make the most of the time. Don't just regurgitate whatever Hollywood serves you. Use some discretion. Pick some films that actually are going to feed that need that you have to be inspired, to be encouraged to be a better person or a better F-14 pilot. Try to find some films and actually break down what they are doing culturally and why they matter. Because as we can see through the vast sweep of the last 20 years of Hollywood, this is kind of a big deal. People are willing to spend a lot of money on messages. People are willing to spend a lot of money being encouraged and inspired. Like I said, there's a gazillion different YouTube channels that talk about movies all the time. So I don't really want to turn this channel into that. I want to try to find things that maybe people aren't saying. Maybe some stories like the Jack Epps Jr. one that other people don't have to kind of shed a little bit of light on this. And it ties in with what we're trying to do as a company with TREX Arms. We want to actually push the kind of messages that, can't believe I'm saying this, ended up in a Top Gun movie about fighter pilot jocks. And the way that things shake out in culture really are reflected in a lot of films. So it's worth analyzing those as well, which is why the T-Rex Talk podcast next week is going to be a conversation about this kind of not just marketing of pop culture, but the way that it is developed. And we'll dig a little deeper into video games, because in some ways things have moved faster and the differences are even more disparate than in Hollywood. Should be pretty enlightening.